Hello there. So you're going into your Literature Paper 1 exam full of excitement and enthusiasm, ready to answer a question on Macbeth, which will look a little bit like this. And you'll read it to find a brief introduction to the task which has been set, which will look a bit like this. So you're told where the extract has been taken from, in this case Act 2, Scene 2, and you get a bit of context. The extract is then printed for you underneath. All of the current GCSE exam papers are closed books, so this is the only bit of the play that you'll have in front of you. You need to look at this closely and get as much out of this as you can. Underneath this printed extract, you'll be given the focus for the task you need to complete. And as I've said previously, you need to highlight the key words in this. The task is not asking you to write everything that you know about this scene or the play in general. The focus here is on the relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and how Shakespeare presents this relationship. So everything that you write needs to link back to this focus in some way. I'm just going to briefly show you the marking criteria here and bring out a few important points. First of all, that you need to respond to the question in a way which is thoughtful and developed, so you need to make sure that you write enough in response to the task that you've been given. You need to embed or integrate quotation into the sentence that you are writing. You need to use subject-specific terminology effectively, so adjective, simile, metaphor, personification, whatever it is you can find in the extract. Make links to other relevant parts of the play, which is what the criteria means when it says the whole text. You need to show a clear understanding of contextual factors, such as the time that Shakespeare wrote the play or the genre of tragedy, and finally offer some sort of alternative interpretations. Show an understanding that there is more than one way that you could read the action. With this particular extract, the main point that you want to be making in response to this question is that Macbeth is experiencing a sort of psychological crisis following his murder of Duncan, and that Lady Macbeth is trying to deal with it. In other words, she is shown to be the stronger and more together character, and this is consistent with the first half of the play. The scene is the part where Macbeth has carried out the murder of King Duncan and is meeting Lady Macbeth in the courtyard of his castle. And we can tell immediately that he is in a highly agitated state because he's telling his wife how he thought he heard a voice crying out from one of the neighbouring rooms. Lady Macbeth is confused, anxious, maybe even angered by the state that her husband is in, and the question which begins this is one of 3 questions in this very short 20-line extract. His agitation is revealed in the first lines that Macbeth says here. He's heard a voice calling out, "Sleep no more," in the dead of night. But in reality, this is just the early signs of Macbeth's guilt and paranoia coming out. The truth of this imagined voice is borne out later in the play, in scenes like Act 3, Scene 4, for example, when Lady Macbeth says, "You lack the season of all natures, sleep." Lady Macbeth's reaction to this outburst is typical in reflecting their relationship in the first half of the play, which is where Macbeth suffers moments of crisis or doubt and Lady Macbeth tries to manipulate and take control of the situation. You can see this in Act 1, Scene 7, for example, after Macbeth says, "We will proceed no further in this business," and yet a few lines later he's giving the murder his full attention. Similarly, in Act 3, Scene 4, when Macbeth sees the ghost of Banquo, it's Lady Macbeth who takes control of the situation, making excuses for her husband and chastising him for his outburst. Here, she tries to take control of the situation in a few different ways. One of the first of these is through flattery, and we can see examples of this through the use of the adjective used to describe him as worthy and noble. And this might remind you of how Lady Macbeth addressed her husband when they first see each other in Act 1, Scene 5, when she describes him as great Glamis and worthy Cawdor, right before planting the first suggestion that they killed Duncan. She's trying to remind Macbeth of his strength, because to think so brain-sickly of things is a sign of weakness, especially within the context of the play, for a man. Even Macduff in Act 4, Scene 3, after hearing that his wife and children have been murdered, is told to dispute it like a man and to respond with violence rather than emotion. And so you might argue, in their relationship, again, just within the context of the play, that she displays the more masculine qualities. She did ask for the evil spirits in the world to unsex her in Act 1, Scene 5. The irony of this, of course, is that it is Lady Macbeth whose brain is sick at the end of the play. Another way in which Lady Macbeth is shown to be the more dominant one in their relationship is through the use of commands, where the verb is put at the beginning of a sentence. We call that an imperative, and it creates a more commanding tone. And there are 3 examples of this language in this extract: go get, go carry, and give me. The first of these is telling Macbeth to get some water to wash the blood off his hands. The blood is described using a metaphor, filthy witness. And it's important to remember that blood is symbolic of guilt in this play. Lady Macbeth believes that this witness to their crime can simply be washed away, but we know that the guilt will remain with them for long afterwards and ultimately lead to the suicide, which effectively ends their relationship. This precedes the discovery that Macbeth has brought the daggers away from the crime scene, and she commands her husband to go carry them and smear the sleepy grooms with blood. What is interesting about this command is the way in which Macbeth stands up to his wife and the fact that for once his resolve holds firm. But this is only because, as Macbeth admits, he is afraid to think what he has done, and he's afraid to look at Duncan's murdered body. And so it is Lady Macbeth who is the one who must return the daggers, as illustrated by the 3rd command, give me the daggers, which once again illustrates who is the stronger in this relationship. The final way in which we see Lady Macbeth manipulating her husband is through the use of insults, and again we have seen this before. You may remember Act 1, Scene 7, where she calls him a coward, an animal, and lacking the manly qualities necessary for such an enterprise. In this extract, she mocks and insults her husband in 2 ways. Firstly, after Macbeth says, "I'll go no more," she says he is infirm of purpose. Now, infirm is the root of the word infirmary, which is where you would go if you were sick. So Lady Macbeth is pretty much saying that his resolve, his determination and commitment to the task is inhibited, impaired, or even diseased. You can also look at this word and connect it to the opposite of firm. In other words, something strong, which once again is Lady Macbeth suggesting that he is the weaker of the 2 in this relationship. The other way in which she insults him is by calling his fears of the crime scene childish. A painted devil would be a person dressed up in makeup to look like a devil, which might scare a child but shouldn't scare an adult. The makeup in this metaphor is the blood covering Duncan, making him seem more fearful than he is. Now, the irony here, again, is that it is Lady Macbeth, not Macbeth, who becomes more affected by the blood as the play reaches its conclusion. In Act 5, Scene 1, we see her obsessively washing the blood off of her hands while she sleeps. And while Macbeth in Act 5, Scene 3 bravely faces down the joint English and Scottish armies with "I'll fight till from my bones my flesh be hacked." And so the relationship between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth is not as straightforward as it might seem. While Macbeth displays elements of weakness in the face of his wife's clever manipulations, it's also clear that, for all her bravado, Lady Macbeth is nowhere near as strong as she makes out.